I'm Tabitha Hume, and today we're going to be learning about carbohydrate metabolism and insulin resistance. Now, to learn about that properly, we need to understand what goes on inside the body. So let's start. Here is the blood, and it's got a little bit of energy or glucose in it. We need that. And here is the tummy, unfortunately, empty. Now, at any given time, if I was to prick your finger and squeeze out a little bit of blood, we would notice, if you were normal, that there would be 5 little bits of glucose per squidge of blood. That's normal. A level of 5 is what you need to remember. Now, if we're naughty and we haven't put anything inside our tummy, but we're still running around doing a whole lot of things, we are using up that extra glucose and our blood sugar level is now dropping. And after a little while, we've used up too much glucose and our blood sugar level is now 3. So that sort of marks the end and says, oh, I'm now very hungry. So we put in a piece of whole wheat bread. Yay! Now we put in that piece of bread because it is a carbohydrate and it contains glucose. Now, bread happens to be the kind of carbohydrate that releases its component glucoses into your bloodstream very, very fast. So, after eating that piece of bread, it releases its glucose so fast that we end up with a blood that is completely chock-a-block full of glucose, blood sugar level of about 10. Now, the blood really and truly is the superhighway, taking the sugar to where it needs to go. And where it needs to go is into the muscle, because that's where energy is used. But the problem lies here. We have a whole lot of little doors that lie between the blood and the muscles, and we need to open those, and there's only one thing really that opens those doors, and that is insulin. Now try and think of insulin as a little policeman. He is a great chap, but he likes to tidy things away, he likes to store things, he likes to make things all clean and tidy and perfect. So we like insulin, and he does a great job. So when our blood glucose level is very high here, little insulins run out and say, oh, this is a terrible, terrible traffic jam of glucose, I've got to clear it away. So let me start pushing on those doors, because only insulin can. And they push open those doors to the muscle and successfully open them, and then take all the excess glucose from the blood and shove it into the muscle. Then the doors close, insulin pushes off, it's done its job, and we are left now with a normal blood sugar level of 5 and muscles that are full of glucose. And you might say to me, well, extra sugar like that into the muscle might just turn to fat. Well, scientifically, yes, but in reality, let me show you what does happen. Inside those muscles, we've got glycogen stores, which is stored kind of glucose that is ready there for emergencies. So the extra glucose that goes in has nowhere to store. So you might say, well, what happens then? Well, let's look inside that muscle. We've got a whole lot of little muscle fibers that jump up and down all the time, using energy and releasing it as heat. Just touch your arm, you know that you're warm, you're alive. That muscle has tone. It is jumping up and down all the time, using energy and releasing it as heat. And that's all good and well. So when we put in extra glucose, those little muscle fibers just jump up and down even more, and they start releasing even more heat. So that's the fate of excess glucose. It makes our muscle fibers jump up and down even faster. So it gives us a bit of carbo sizing. So this is carbohydrate metabolism. We understand that. But what happens in insulin resistance? Well, let's go right back to the beginning. Here's our blood with a little bit of glucose in it that amounts to 5, which is normal. We run around, we don't eat anything, and our blood glucose level drops. We're running out of fuel. At that point in time, we eat our bread, which most people love, and that bread is a carbohydrate and releases glucoses, so we can fill back up again. Now that bread happens to be a quick release carbohydrate, so the glucoses that are in there are released awfully fast, and as a result our blood sugar levels fill up very quickly to a blood sugar level of 10, and we now have syrup blood. So the only thing that can store that away into the muscle where it really needs to go is insulin. Remember the little storage policeman? And these 2 little insulins run out into the bloodstream and say, oh, it's a terrible traffic jam. And they start pushing on those insulin receptors, or those insulin doors. Now in insulin resistance, those doors are shut tight. They are really, really, really stiff. And as a result, those 2 little insulins can push all they like. They can shout store, they can push, they can sweat, but those doors don't open. The body is resistant to insulin. So the body notices, hang on a second, that blood sugar level is still a little bit high after a second or 2. So it sends out more insulin policemen to get that job done. And more insulins come, and more insulins come. And after a little while, we now have many, many little insulin policemen all pushing at those doors, really trying hard, all shouting store and trying to tidy everything up. Now with that amount of brute force, those doors are overwhelmed and the glucose is cleared from the blood, our blood sugar level does return back to 5. So this is not diabetes. Diabetes is when your sugar level remains high and those insulins, as much as they try, don't work. This is not diabetes, this is insulin resistance. So the blood sugar level does return back to 5. But the problem lies in there being so many insulins. In the olden days, we didn't used to have a problem with there being too much insulin in the blood. As long as the sugar was cleared, we didn't care because the person didn't have diabetes. Now we know that too much insulin in the blood is a huge problem, and I'll show you why. If you happen to eat that piece of bread and it had a little bit of butter on it, a little bit of margarine or even some low-fat cheese, those fat droplets would enter into the bloodstream at the same time as that glucose from the bread. Tons and tons of insulin guys in there, all screaming store, 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 leads to one result, and that is all those little fat droplets get stored as fat very fast. And the interesting thing is somebody with insulin resistance and a resultant high number of insulins coming out to do the job stands much more chance of storing fat very fast than somebody who does not have insulin resistance. And you can see why. The body is perpetually in a state of store. Store, store, store. So any little bit of fat that comes in will be stored fast. And it's quite interesting to note that our body shape determines this, because insulin loves to store any bits of fat it can get hold of onto our tummy. So by looking at someone, their body shape will give us a good idea of how much insulin resistance or not they have. A pear shape with a small waist and bigger hips, they may not like it, but it means that their insulin is working fine. They don't have insulin problems. Somebody, however, who has an apple shape where their waist is actually a bit bigger than their hips, we know for a fact has too much insulin inside their blood. It just requires a blood test in order to tell how much. So just by looking at someone, it's quite interesting. A woman that has a waist circumference of more than 88 centimeters stands a very high risk of developing lifestyle disorders because she has insulin resistance. And by the same token, a man who has a waist circumference of more than 102 centimeters, no matter how tall or short he is, stands the chance of having lifestyle disorders because we know that he has insulin resistance. So you can see the insulin little policemen do their job beautifully. They tidy things away, they keep our blood sugar level nice and normal. But having too much of the little chaps can cause a number of problems. And those problems are all grouped together and called Syndrome X. That's what I treat. Syndrome X comprises of high blood insulin levels, a high cholesterol and strokes and heart attacks, a high blood pressure. It also leads to certain types of infertility, gout and inflammatory disorders, and a myriad of other problems that are very easily sorted out once we understand how insulin works and what to do with it. So we move on from here to what kind of diet should we be following and how do we fix this problem. Thanks for watching.